Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here. This is a really nice group. Thanks for coming. For those of you coming from out of UCLA here, there's a big group of you here. It's really nice to see you. Thanks for making it here at 5 o'clock. All right, so welcome to the Source Generative Art Lecture Series. This lecture series is a little bit different, where we've invited people to talk more personally, more like an autobiography, more like a memoir, kind of like how did you get involved with generative art? What was your most sort of iconic work? What was your breakout work? And sort of speaking in that way. This is today. We're also broadcasting live on YouTube right now, so that we have other people joining us as well. Last week we hosted Mitchell Chan, hosted by Lauren Lee McCarthy. And then the week before we hosted Operator, and hosted by myself. And then at the end of the lecture series, we'll be posting all these lectures and for access, and we hope to keep the series going from there. So the lecture series has 3 sponsors: UCLA Social Software, the Department of Design Media Arts, which is where we are right now. And I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Casey Reese, a professor in the department. I forget to do that a lot. And then the Generative Art Foundation. And so really, really lucky to have Jeff Davis here tonight and Jeff's support for putting on this lecture series. And Jeff will introduce Martin, and then Martin will come up and speak. And then after that, they will have a sort of a Q&A, get the conversation started. And then after that, we'll have some audience questions. So thank you very much for being here tonight.
All right, thank you, Casey. Thanks for being here tonight. My name's Jeff Davis. I'm a generative artist myself. I'm a strategic advisor at Art Blocks, but I'm also the co-founder of the Generative Art Foundation, which Casey mentioned, and we're excited to co-sponsor this series along with Social Software and UCLA DMA. Big thank you to Casey and Lauren for inviting us to participate. It's been fun preparing for this. Tonight, I'm very happy to introduce you to my good friend, Martin Grasser. Marty is an interdisciplinary creative working at the intersection of design, art, and systems. If you're a design lover, you might know him from his work on the Twitter logo. Or if you're into generative art, you might know him from his Art Blocks project Squares, or his project Themes and Variations, which he did in collaboration with the great Vera Molnar. Marty and I first met in 2022 at Art Blocks Weekend in Marfa, Texas. And we got to talking about generative art and design principles. And that led us to begin embarking on a collaborative project together early 2023. And I think Marty's going to talk about it a little bit in his presentation, and then we'll touch more on it on our conversation after. But so over the last several years, as part of working on this project, we've made a point of trying to talk every week, have a meeting, and all we do is just share what we're doing on the project, but it's kind of turned into a broader sort of creative sounding board session that we have for each other, which has been a really great sort of thing to have over the last several years working on things, working on my own work. And along the way, our practices have become somewhat intertwined. We released projects at the same time with Trem for Art Basel Miami Beach in 2023, and then we did it again with Bright Moments in Paris in 2024. So I'm very proud to host Marty for his lecture titled The Art of Infrastructures, and continue the conversation with him afterwards. Please welcome one of the most creative people I know, Martin Grasser.
There we go. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks to Casey and Lauren and UCLA and Social Software and the Generative Art Foundation, and to my host today, Taryn, who showed me all around, and the students that I met with today. I got to go in and see some projects, which was incredibly inspiring. And like Casey mentioned, this is a little bit of an autobiographical talk, so kind of talking about how I found myself in the generative art community and was making some of this work before generative art was a term that we used. I was calling it systems art. So I titled my talk talk the art of infrastructure. I should also thank the poster designer. Whoever did that did a great job. It looks beautiful. So for me, everything starts with typography. The alphabet is the ultimate system. This is like my home base for creative thinking. These shapes go out into the world and have so much responsibility. They get strung together in letters and words and paragraphs, and like are out there working every day, and they're collaborative, and people download them and pull them from their drop-down menu and use them to begin conversations or share their thinking. And I see these as shapes. I've always seen these as shapes. So like I've always been interested in the form as opposed to the content. So for me, starting with the first alphabet I published, this is called 188 Sands, and I'll come back to it in just a moment. And this has been going on for thousands of years. This is one of my favorite pieces of art. This is the typography from the Trajan column, and this was put in a public space in Italy, where they would like use it to make announcements and have people come and read what the city was about or the town was about. And it's like one of the first versions of this proportional alphabet that we still see today in typefaces like Futura. But it was also bringing people together to read, listen, learn, make proclamations, all that stuff. And you can still go to the Trajan column today. There's a famous rubbing of it by a typographer named Father Tadish that is in museums, and you can see and everything. Just an incredible piece of work, considering this was done with a stone chisel. And around 100 years ago, Times New Roman was introduced to us, and this is like the type that has served the world its news for the last 100 years. I think this is the most ubiquitous typeface in the world, and it's kind of starting to lose out. And then today's global marketplace of the brands that populate our world and advertise to us and talk to us. And so this idea that type is out there all around us, working and doing its thing. And just like the generative lecture series set in Arial, here we have my favorite typeface, Arial. And I love this typeface because not for its beauty, it is beautiful, but it's not celebrated that way, but more for its ubiquity. It's everywhere. I think I did some light research, and right now, today, Arial is installed on 4 billion devices around the world. And that's just what's active. And if you think of this being the default software for like Microsoft Office, PowerPoint, the early internet, signage, or at least where I grew up in Northern California, the cleaners and all that, everything was in Arial. And there was just something about that that spoke to me, because again, I'm looking at these things and like, God, I love that capital R. Or there's something about the 9 in Arial that speaks to me. And so to me, this is really what I mean by like the art of infrastructures, but of course in the form of a typeface that's legible and has a purpose. So in a lot of ways, this was like my first piece of generative art. This is my typeface, which I showed before, the first one I released, called 188 Sands. And for me, this is a drawing of Arial. This like started inspired by Arial. And this is what being an artist is to me, is like, there's a blank sheet of paper and you're like, I want to do one. I want to make one and see what it looks like when I make it. And so I, poured my heart into bringing the things that I wanted to see in Arial into this typeface. But there's also this joy in me that you put all this work into the drawing and then you don't sell it. Well, I mean, you sell it, you license it, but you give it away for other people to use. And that was just an incredibly powerful thing to me that appealed to me in a way making a drawing or a painting didn't. You make a drawing, you make a painting, you put it on the wall, people look at it, and that's kind of the end of that transaction. Where there's a dialogue, there's a selection, there's a weight, there's whether it's Roman or oblique, all those things. And again, that starts to like hint at what generative art would be for me in my life. And so this is the atomic element. This is my favorite letter. I think this is a beautiful drawing, and formally, like the way the weight modulates, the way we move from thick to thin, the way we like bring masses together to avoid like clumping at small sizes, like this just holds magic to me even today. Like I could talk about this for an hour probably and go through all the lowercase a's and talk about what I like about them, what I don't like about them, the romance of this letter. And here I also love that it's devoid of meaning. It has no responsibility to carry the sound of the letter A, or the responsibility in a word to like be a long A or a short A, or whatever part it has in that word. Like, I also love looking at letters in that way. And again, I think the drawing of it was teaching me what I liked about this, because once you make one letter, once you translate from thick to thin, or decide how the terminals are going to end, or how you're going to modulate weight, like you've basically designed 85% of the typeface. This set of relationships that make the form feel the same but different. So they're operating on the same principles, but they feel distinctly unique. And again, for me, I'm just like when I look at these, or whenever I work on type, it's like, wow, this is how I got to generative art. You can see here, start with the Roman A, the regular weight, and then you can choose italic or Roman, which is the straight up version. And then you can choose thin condensed or bold or extended heavy and add weight. And these begin to feel a lot like traits that we use in our code for generative art. And so I think this was the beginning of like getting my brain conditioned to think this way. And so again, like, I grew up in the 90s, and Arial was my TV menu as well, and it was a pixelated version. So part of what I wanted to do was get in there and begin to add craft and beauty to the sort of the degraded pixelated forms that I had seen with my brothers at home growing up, deciding what to watch. But even then, I was so sensitive to the letter forms, and I think the shapes and the colors and everything. I just didn't know it at the time, but like my brain was registering all that, but I didn't have a way to sort of like express myself or put it out there. And so at its core, the function of all these efforts has always been a combination of legibility and communication. Typography. I see shapes. I'm interested in something different. And I don't think I knew it until I started working on type. But I'm a dyslexic type designer. I don't really read that much. I listen to a lot of books, but I see 2 paragraphs of text and am not, I'm not getting through that most likely. I'm going to get bored by the end, or it just doesn't hold my attention. But the texture, that block, the word becomes a drawing, the paragraph, the sentence, these things become drawings for me. And so like, it was very apparent to me that when we think about type, we think about form and content, and I'm like all the way over here on the form side. And so this became like kind of the jumping off point for me in terms of like moving from design that had function, in terms of like, you're going to read this book, into a freer expression of art. And I think this form exploration allowed me to realize that like, oh, these are all abstractions. Like, the letter T is an abstract drawing of the sound ta. And we all just agree on it, but you just move one language over to realize that like, this is a fragile agreement amongst a certain group of people, and you can move over into another culture and that doesn't matter. And so I wanted to take that and start making art. I was immediately interested in that. I think, I was telling Casey, I had in 2008 or 2009, when I was at Art Center, a group of UCLA students came over to Art Center. I remember downloading processing and drawing a yellow square and getting it to rotate. And I said, I've never done cocaine, but I imagine that's what it felt like. I knew this was what I wanted to be doing. And there was something different to me too about rendering something in Illustrator versus rendering it in code. It was magical that I was sending a set of instructions and then getting this shape or drawing back. And so I was getting into the back-end code of, just using code in Python and some of the type design software like RoboFont, and I'm old school, so I like FontLab too. And so in 2018 or 2019, they started to allow colors into font design, into type design software. And so obviously this wasn't very hard, but I just created a random matrix where I combined circles and made the color dot font and assigned a color to each letter. And this is where, you start to really see, like, again, generative, and that these shapes, these are just shapes, and that they are, like, we're forming a piece of art when we type, or when we have, like I said, a letter, word, sentence, paragraph, page, book, on and on you go. Like, those are all form, and they aggregate to make something that in my head, I would call a drawing or a painting. And so this is all the information is there, obviously, but just completely illegible. If you wanted to draw it or to read it, you could decipher the system and get good enough to read it, but like that, obviously that's not the point. I want to talk about the columns, the left-align typography, the indent on the first paragraph, the headline versus the byline, the masthead of the New York Times versus the little message at the top, like all the news that's fit to print above it, and just re-examine that relationship that we have with content. I built an internet plugin where you could flip a switch and go around the internet and have, again, this is a generative browser. As you pull up a browser, you're getting a new piece of art. And so it's still super recognizable, obviously, it says Google, but it's also defamiliarized. And in that way, we can look closer. And I even loved the drop shadows on Domino's Pizza coming up with those big red receding shapes. Like this, again, in a way for me, this was generative. Like you've created a playing field where art can play. And as an artist, you design the rules for that, but like you're interjecting things that are outside of your control, how the type is set, the size of it, whether or not it has drop shadows, kind of how this thing is behaving. And it just became so interesting to me, again, as somebody who like doesn't read that much. And we can do the same with our phones. And I don't know the answer to that math equation, but it's pretty interesting. Same with the weather. And again, the information is there, but we're making functional art. And then I took it the other way with the typography. I had, at this point, started traveling a lot for work, and I would just grab newspapers wherever I went. And like I later in life learned that this is like a communist-leaning Chinese newspaper. And I don't understand, I can't read this obviously, but I think like in erasing, you're doing the same thing. Like you're defanging the content and leaving just the structures, just the infrastructure of the information in that way, where it's like, this is financial news, this is an ad, this is where a photo was, this is where the masthead of the paper was. And I left the date because I thought that was kind of fun, to March 17, 2011. I think I made this in maybe 2014. But so for all these years, I was grabbing newspapers from all around the world, and I just wanted to see sort of celebrate the containers that carry this information. And so here's the front and back spread of this newspaper. And again, I love how the different columns and places tell you kind of what information went there. And then this is another quick one where it's just, this is the FT, the Financial Times. I love light pink newspaper. I think that's such a cool choice. And so just removing all the information and then using those elements in a repurposed way to make a composition. And so it became a way of drawing with kind of like found object or language as material in this way, where using the things that were already there to repurpose them to kind of take up the page. And so that led me to my first like truly generative art project. And that way of working with typography, like first very formally as a font or a typeface that's legible, and then into an illegible typeface, and then into actually like removing the typography, had me just kind of like ready to go. And I had a way of making work that had, taken me out of the classroom of drawing and painting in this more formal way of making work. I was an illustration student. So I had the code to the photocopier the last 2 terms of my art career or art school career. And I was a poor art student, and I liked synthesizers and Arduinos and all these things with buttons. And like at the time, again, I didn't realize it, but that little control panel there is basically an algorithm. I mean, there's a closed network algorithm on that. And so I had this idea of putting a 1-inch by 1-inch square on the photocopier, and this is what came back. And I was like so excited, like all this difference, like the translation between those two, it felt like 1,000 artistic decisions in there. And I was like, that's beautiful. This is beautiful, this error and this mistake and the machine intervention and everything, and these lines that were created. And so from there, in the menu, literally on the photocopier, you can invert, stretch, shrink, enlarge, repeat, distort, stamp, or patternize your artwork. And so I basically built up a language, moving in and out of zooms and repetition, and I spent hours in front of this photocopier. And for me, it was almost like my childhood relationship with like Mike Tyson or Zelda, whereas like I could just play the video games like crazy, and I got so good at this. And so I was able to play with repetition and inversions and pull it up a scale, and you can start to see like how these begin to build on each other and what happens when they start to fall out or print on top of each other where the toner wouldn't stick. And I think this is where, again, generative art works for me, because I think you can get so detailed with the noise, you know. And I was learning about this photocopier now, like this is an dry electrostatic photocopier, dry electrostatic toner photocopier, and there's certain uncoated papers where the ink wouldn't stick and things like that. And so you start to see like the beauty of some of those effects, and we can scale up. And even here you can see, like, I was sort of saying, you know, the way the gray moves across, like only a machine could do that. Like, it's so perfectly imperfect that, again, it just felt right to me. And I could run the pages through multiple times and get these really dense effects and dark blacks and everything. And then when the toner ran low, it was like the best of times. That's when I was like, I'm not leaving until I'm getting no prints, because I was so excited by the combination of repetition, building on top of each other's transparencies, and then mixed with these errors. And so, like, I can still literally remember the first time I hit like go on the photocopier and what came out. It was like a romantic comedy where it's like the world slowed down. I was like drawn to this thing, and I don't think I left the photocopier for the next 3 or 4 weeks, and I just had reams and reams of paper that I was, you know, feeling into. But this was my first time I made a body of work that had traits that began to describe something that I was trying to get at in multiple pieces, as opposed to one piece of art where I stand and say, this is what I made. And I was really fascinated with that way of working and the results that came out of it. And it felt like a better way for me to talk about my work as well. Instead of trying to say everything, it allowed me to, you know, point at the work and say, what I love about generative art too is the answer is sort of on the surface. If you look at a collection of the work, you can kind of see where the artist was probing and pushing on different elements. And so just like typography led to the photocopier, this way of working eventually found its way into my commercial work. And so this is my iconic work. And in 2010, 2011, I was hired to redesign the Twitter logo. And I think I was like less than 2 years out of art school, so like 100% unqualified to be doing that at the time. But I was, you know, again, I kind of quickly learned that I had, and again, I'll show some of the work, but this way of working was something I could sell, something I could talk to leadership about. Before I went to art school, I was in the world of high finance as a receptionist. And I didn't even get, like, not only was I not in the room for important decisions, but like when the company would go on a company offsite, like I would stick around to answer the phones. And I always remember being like, someday I'd like to be in that important room weighing in on a decision, any decision. And I remember showing this to people at the company and this way of thinking, and like, oh my God, everyone's like listening to me, and these are important people, and this is an important symbol. And for me, it was just like, again, affirmation that there's something here for me. And so here you can see the bird, how we constructed it. As I remember, it's 13 or 15 circles overlapping in 3 different sizes to render this thing. And then here you see it alone. And again, for me, the results are like simple, harmonious, and balanced. And it wasn't made by a machine. It could have been. But again, I get the feeling of the simplicity of the shape, the simplicity of the gesture, and that like this is truly something you couldn't draw by hand. And I would challenge everyone to try it. Everyone go home tonight and take the Marty challenge of trying to draw the lowercase a in Helvetica and the Twitter bird. And you realize how hard these things are to draw by hand. And it's fun and helpful to employ systems as a way of rendering. And so it started like any other project, like trying to get idea down onto paper through drawing, the quickest way to capture like your concept and find form and find gestures. And here's like, a small sample of the insane amount of birds I ended up drawing over a 6 or 7 month time frame, whatever it was. And here you can kind of see I overlaid most of the iterations on top of each other, but you can see once we dialed in on that circle-based form, we were really noodling around the edges. I included this one. You can just see like deeper curve of the wing, longer wing, shorter, higher curved wing. Like we were playing with the beak and the tail and the space in between the feathers and all this. But again, what for me as a designer it did for me is that we were already in a system. And so we were just moving the circles around, and it made everything so much easier for me as a way to realize form. So this one's a little different, where generative art usually goes like, here's a bunch of rules and we're going outward. This one was almost like towards one final form coming inward. And it launched in May of 2012, and it got retired whenever Elon took over Twitter. I can't remember when that was, but a year or two ago. And it didn't release to much fanfare. There's a lot of people get mad over logo changes, but when it was retired, Sofia Garcia called me and told me that I had to send out a tweet about it coming down. And I feel like one of those like guys with that story now, where like I composed a 4-tweet thread or whatever and put my phone down. And I think as of today, it's at like 14 million views. And I've gotten comments from people all around the world, and it's a really beloved little bird, and I'm super proud of it as a drawing. And so Twitter was meaningful for me in that it gave me a career as a designer, but it also opened up a lot of doors for me, and I'm almost positive it gave me the chance to collaborate with Vera Molnar as my breakthrough project. And Vera's big thing was 2% randomness. And Vera taught me so much on this project, and whoever doesn't know Vera Molnar, you should look her up. As far as I know, she's the first woman to make art on a computer, and she is just a legend and has so much incredible work. And I had known her work, and I was so thrilled to be able to work with her. And she sent me a brief, and her and her team sent a brief, and it was about 5 paragraphs, and she went on and on about letter forms, and it was things like, a C is almost a circle, but it doesn't close. But if your pen were runny, the C could close, but it would be like a blot. That's why I love a C. Or like an M is almost a square, but not really. You can draw it as a square, but it'll feel too wide. M's are so interesting. And it was filled with these things like this. And then she concluded with, letters are sort of my thing. And I was like, mine too. I love letters. And I was so excited to get this chance to work with her. And so we worked together for 7 months. I had somebody tell me, I can't believe you put your hand on her chest. That's the graphic. On her hand, just to let you know. And she had this great chain on, and she was 98 at the time. And we sat together for about 45 minutes, and we had built a couple different ways of collaborating. She had a website where she could say yes, no, maybe on the website and move things around. But for me, it was like the end of my imposter syndrome is what I would say for me, where I think we all creative people, at least as far as I know, have some form of like, well, I'm not that good. Like I'm not that big, or I'm not doing this. And Vera was so much wind in my sails at all times. And I was so intimidated to present work to her, especially the first time. And she kept saying things like, this boy is a genius. I'm like 47 years old. I'm like, not a boy, but when you're 98, you can call. And she was so adventurous and kept pushing me like further, more abstraction, be braver. And to me, I think I was so timid in the beginning, but it really helped me. I guess for someone like her to be saying that we're headed in the right direction, we've all had that moment where your boss or someone who you admire is like saying like, no, this is good. Like, really, this is good? And like, she was so aggressively excited about my work that it just made it like that project that finally like set me free to stop doubting so much of myself. And so this is some of Vera's work and the work that I had really known her for coming out of school. But you can see, how we're friends. When you think about like typography moving down to abstraction and being squished, like this was exactly the world I wanted to live in. So I'll quickly walk through some of the highlights of this project. These were the 15 sketches that she sent over to us as like the beginning of the project. If you look below, again, you can see back to the very beginning of this project, the talk, sort of the love affair with typography. And we digitized her first 15, and these were part of all 500 outputs in some form or another. And it was a way of sort of like anchoring on Vera. And then these are the outputs. There were 500, and so these are 45 that represents Vera's initial drawings that we made in collaboration with her. And then I pulled out a few of the favorites to show how just we sort of, I guess going back to that one slide, invert, stretch, shrink, enlarge, repeat. We obliterated these letters. And for somebody who loves to think about the idea of letters walking around the world without having to carry the meaning of the sound and do the things that they do, but just think of them as shapes, this was really a dream come true for me. So the project is based on 3 letters, NFT, and we use those as sort of the base for every piece of art. You can see the top right is actually a T, but just with negative space in the white space. And then those like wispy lines, those are also T's, where we've rotated the top all the way back down onto the stem. And that second one over on the right there, that's an N with just the 2 negative spaces being populated by the dark blue. And repetition, where does the F start and stop, produced amazing results as well. And I really got to like go for it in terms of treating the letter form strictly as form. And I built probably like 9 or 12 specific tools just for this project in terms of ways of manipulating the letters and creating algorithms that could like either destroy or reinterpolate or redraw them. These are just N's stacked on top of each other. Here's a field of T's that you see descending into density. This is more T's, again, just ripped to shreds and put back together in a grid. And here's sort of a larger selection of the 500 that we made together. And this was one of the interesting things about this project also was, most generative work is you load the algorithm, people come mint, and they get what they want, or they get what they get, and that's it. Vera was adamant about curating the 500. We produced, and I'm not saying she went through all of them, but we counted at the end, we had over 72,000 outputs over 7 months. And we curated 500. And I remember going into some of the discords and some of the, 0x whoever getting super upset that this wasn't a live, like a live mint. That's not generative art, according to the Discord. And I just remember thinking, like, then you go tell Vera Molnar, like, what generative art is. I would imagine that she has a bit more authority here. So again, I think it was one of those things like giving you comfort of where and how to break the rules and being able to stand behind it when you feel that way about something. And so last year, this was Mint 0, and it was acquired by Center Pompidou. And I got to go there with my mom and tell her that my work was in that museum, but she couldn't see it. And that was a major moment for me in my life, just sort of her seeing, I remember as a kid, her saying like, you see things so differently. You talk about things so differently. And I think it was like a full circle moment to be in her favorite city at a museum. And it's Vera's name who's, got the work in there, but I'm very proud of the collaboration. And it was a major moment for me. So that brings me to where I am today, or what I'm working on next. And like Jeff said, 4 years ago or 3 years ago, we started this project about design principles. And this project means a great deal to me. One, I love design with a passion. It gave me everything that I have in my life. Before I was a designer, I was a receptionist, making no money and miserable. And design has allowed me to travel the world, to meet incredible people, to see my drawings on the side of a milk carton and, just on the news and everything. And it's also like, as I talk to my kids, and my kids are starting to grow up, and I talk to them about the work I do, I also explained to them that like, it's more than that. Like it's my hobby, it's my passion, it's how I make money, it's what I talk about, it's what I read about. It allows me to be in rooms like this with creative heroes of mine, you know, and it's also how I make friends and how I have friends. And Jeff has become, you know, an incredible friend to me over the last couple years. And we've also, and you know, Jeff's art was some of the first art I bought, and I could feel it speaking to me. Like Jeff and I are doing some of the same things in like a little bit different directions, but wow, this work resonates with me. And so it represents to me a friendship. It represents to me like my favorite parts about art, like talking about it and forming community around it. And so Jeff had come up with this idea of like, you know, Jeff's an educator and he's published books, and he approached me with this idea of like, I have an idea for a book with no words in it. And as somebody who struggles to write about his own work, I loved this idea of like letting the image speak for itself. And he wanted to sort of bring back the books that are in the canon of sort of the greatest books. And these are the ones I could find high res of, but there's many, many more. But Joseph Mueller-Brockman, Armin Hoffman, Joseph Albers, and Jeff and I were both pulling down our books with all these like dog ears and sticky notes out of them. And it just felt like it was so exciting, like the same way of like thinking about redrawing Ariel or doing this thing that meant so much to me and spending time with it. This was a similar thing, like, and so Jeff had a list of 36 principles, the principles of design, but we wanted to do it generatively as a way of giving it to people to try it yourself, you know, like change a parameter, see what you think. And so like Jeff said, it went on and on, you know, like we talked about it and we're making work and we'd have another project and it would quiet down and come back up. But I have 3 examples to show for today. And so our principle is emphasis, our sub-principle is focus. We use the shape of a square. And then we have 2 colors. And Jeff, over the period of the project, moved towards like the most simple output he could come up with. And very organically, I moved towards this really soft, gauzy, organic thing. And I think what became apparent to us was like the really interesting spaces in between the two. Like, okay, now interpolate that in your brain. If this is 2 artists' solution to emphasis, like what's the in-between space that you're gonna fill in or that you get to answer, that you see as being available? And so this was doing like all the things that just make me excited in terms of like inviting people to want to try their own, the universal principles of design, like honoring the past by looking back and going back to the heroes who filled my brain with ideas and ways of sketching and ways of understanding how design functions and form works. So here's color, harmony, and squares, and you can see I'm breaking the rules like Vera told me to, and I'm adding different colors in here with my blue and the red. And here's ambiguity and our little soft space, and Jeff's on the right. And to me, there was just this electrical charge between the two of like, these are 2 possibilities of how to solve this problem of ambiguity. And here's the code, here's how we're doing it. And like I said, it's been a years-long conversation. We've made a habit of recording the conversations, and we want those to now be like in part of the book of how we talked about it and how we had this sort of relationship that led to the outputs. One more, our movement, which I just think is like so pretty and so beautiful. And like I said, I love that blank space in between the two. That to me is almost where the art is. Like here's 2 solutions, and then what's possible is super exciting. One more with contrast and orientation. I love Jeff's big crop of the circle there so much. And here's our fake book cover of what we will make someday. And that's the talk. So there we are. Thank you.
So these 2 will be in dialogue for a little while, and then we'll open it up for audience questions after.
Yeah, thanks. I'll keep it short. I had a few questions, but since we can do audience questions, I'd prefer that anyway. So anyway, Thank you, Marty. It was awesome. I don't know. I know you pretty well, and I learned a whole lot. So that was awesome. So I'm going to touch on a couple of things I think that you covered in your presentation. I think that going back a little bit and sort of you were mentioning imposter syndrome and kind of working with Vera helped you sort of like get over that, or at least alleviate it somewhat. I don't think it ever goes away. But we've talked about this, and so I wanted to touch on it because we had very similar experiences. So working as a generative artist or systems-based artist or a code-based artist or whatever, you know, you had done it for a while, I had been doing it for a while, and it really wasn't until like 2020 and sort of the advent of art blocks that at least I became aware of that there were other people working this way, that I wasn't just doing crazy things off, you know, and the conversations I would have people in the art world about what I was doing and sort of the confusion or blank looks I would get, like trying to explain it, that it sort of felt like, oh, I'm not crazy, you know? So anyway, you touched on that a little bit when you're talking about Vera, but I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about, I don't know, how your mentality changed when you kind of realized you were part of a community of other people working this same way.
Yeah, I think it was such a massive moment for me. And, you know, social media has a lot of bad parts, but I just remember like being so excited to get on Twitter every day because, I mean, I'd kind of not given up, but I had tried to sell art. I'd gone into galleries and have like gallerists tell me things like, we already have an artist working with color. That was my favorite rejection. But they were just like, well, what is it? You know, I said, oh, like it's a JPEG. So like you take photographs. And like the moment you said code, the conversation was over. Or try to explain that and I didn't know how to talk about either. Like, how many would you make? Like, infinite, a million, you know, like I would just kind of, I didn't have the walls that Art Block had, but I think more importantly for me was the social aspect. I just remember two feelings. One, which was kind of embarrassing, which was like dread of like, is somebody else going to do the thing that I've done and I'm never going to get to show people that I did this thing? Like, because there's so much art coming out and you're just like, it's just like this, I didn't know how to react. But more than that was like, I'm really good at making internet friends. And so I just started messaging everybody and I all of a sudden had friends in Spain, Australia, you know, Northern Europe, Hong Kong, Tokyo, and it was like there's so many of us making work like this, and I felt it's weird because I think we've all had that experience where you make something good or you have something good and you show it to somebody and they're like, I don't get it. And I think I had kind of in my head, I'm like, this is good, this is good work, or I think it's good. And finally, I started sharing work with people in the Art Block community, in the Hic-Ac-Newt community, and the Object, all the Tezos and everything. Is like I was getting so much positive feedback and finding so much art I loved. For the first time in my life, I was buying art, and it felt so good to put art on my walls that represented me. I always thought that galleries were places like, that's not for me. That's a $10,000 painting. I don't have that. I'm not buying a $10,000 painting. But all of a sudden, you could buy art on a digital platform without that awkward social interaction of, is this for sale? How much is it? That type of thing. And I just felt, and then I went to Marfa, and like I said, it was the nicest, my favorite conference I've ever been to. And it's like, this is my type of nerd, you know, like it's like code, art, form, all the things that I loved, and it feels that way still today. I mean, the community's changed and the market has changed, but even talking today to the students, it's like the exhilaration I get out of seeing meaningful work and hard work being made with technology and in cahoots with with technology, using it some way, and in a participation model as opposed to like a single piece that gets done. It just felt like I'd finally found my people. Because typography is a very individual, lone, you have headphones on, you're drawing. That's it. That's like what type. And there was an active discussion on Twitter and everywhere happening, Discord, everywhere. So it's like, for me, such a relief.
Yeah, and I think that, it's both like, as an artist for whatever, 20-ish plus years prior to sort of art blocks in the Web3 community, like I definitely just sort of felt like an outsider, sort of out on an island, and that I didn't really fit in. I think we're still outsiders, but there's a bunch of us that are outsiders. We got a crew now, but I think the other interesting thing that sort of I didn't realize until like, kind of releasing more what has been termed long form generative art, like much larger projects in a digital format than what I could do previously as like a printmaker, essentially working with systems, is that you develop a secondary community of the people who are fans of your work, or the audience who's kind of like engaging with your work. And that was such a great byproduct of kind of what's been happening over the last 5 years that was sort of unexpected. It's not something I was like looking for, but it was like, oh my gosh, there's a bunch of people making it, but there's a bunch of people that are enjoying it and collecting it. And because they're all collecting unique individual pieces from the same system, they're all interconnected with each other, as well. And so it's a really interesting community building sort of way of making art, as well. So anyway, okay. So in conversation, we've been working on it for, the many years, as you mentioned, like it's just turned into this thing that we just sort of do. And every time, as much as we can get together and work on it, we do, and it ebbs and flows. And eventually I think you joke sometimes, you're like, it'll just be great. When we release it, it'll be like, we've been working on this for 10 years. But yeah, I mean, so, Marty, you mentioned the kind of the concept. It's that, we would each have a generative system that would represent a design principle with sort of some shared input that made them relate to each other. And then we'd put them side by side on a page, and the work would be in conversation, with it. And then the result being, well, not only a book that without words, where you're, sort of understanding these principles of design by just visually looking at these different outputs, but that we would also be able to make every book be unique. I think that's something you didn't necessarily touch on. And that's actually been one of the harder parts of like trying to realize this project, is finding someone who's willing to like do that. Like we want to publish this book, but no two books are going to be the same. Every book is going to be a unique output. Anyway, so yeah, when we first started chatting, like what was your interest in working on this project? And maybe, I think you kind of already talked about that, but more importantly, like how has we've been working on it a long time, like how has your thinking evolved since we started kind of embarking on this project?
I think I'm so trained commercially. I'm such a commercial designer that it's almost hard for me to make art sometimes. And honestly, I was just like so thrilled that you reached out to me at first. And I kind of went into my I want to impress Jeff mode, like a client, like I would do with a client. Like, here's my presentation and here's this. And I think it's a little bit like the Vera thing, where I think like at some point I realized that like I was able to just make whatever, like we were trying, like I remember a lot of the conversations like, well, this is emphasis, but it could also be diversity of form, or it could also be this. And at a certain point it was just like, let's just make art and then put them next to each other. And I think the thing that I found the most interesting was like not the answer to the problem, like does this display density or weight or asymmetry or something, but to me, like I said, it's sort of like my favorite part of my job is opening files from other artists and designers. Like when I get an email and somebody I'm working with, or seeing your project today, just like I love seeing other people's creative solutions. And so I think it's like seeing my work next to yours, and I can, like in my head, I can almost like feel the energy bouncing between the two of like, well, what's possible? And I think I went from like this idea of like, I want to put a solution down on page to like, I can't wait to see what the interpolation would be in my head or something. Like, it's like when you send me your code updates and I start rifling, it's like, oh, that one's good. Oh, that one's good. Oh, that one's so good. You know, and you just like, I got to go work on in conversation. Like, I got to fire up the machine and start to do it. I love collaborating. I should like mention Zrinka, who collaborated on 188 Stands with me, Audrey Chin, who collaborates on all my art projects and works in my studio with me, Arsh and Laksh, who help me with code, and Vera, who I already mentioned, but like, and I love the energy you get. And this one was just kind of different because it's like, I'm inspired by what's left unanswered. And I think I didn't think that coming into the work.
Yeah, and I think for me, it was like, yes, probably similar experience. So like, I've always been a fan of your work, and so seeing, you know, the stuff you would share, and then me being like, well, my stuff's not going to be as cool as like Marty's, so I'm going to run in the opposite direction. You had talked about it, and so I'm like, how minimal can I go and still get away with like what I'm doing? You know what I mean? So, yeah. So anyway, I just it still feels the same way, but it was interesting because it is like, you know, doing the work instead of just doing it in isolation and just saying this is what I want to do. It's a response to what somebody else is doing, and so it pushes you into a certain direction. Or we wouldn't want both sides of the page to be looking the same. So you kind of reflexively be like, well, how do I contrast, you know, what Marty's working on? So, and I think another thing that's come up kind of in our conversations on the work and the project in general is that, you know, the nature of like a design textbook where you know, it would go through and talk about the different principles or the different elements, and then it would pick out individual examples either from art history or contemporary art, or have a diagram that the author created. Says this is your, you know, kind of example for that thing that you're reading about, that you're learning about. But generative doesn't work that way. Generative creates a lot of work, and so again, we've talked about this a lot, but like, the idea of, instead of saying, here's the answer, that you're saying, we're going to surround the answer with a lot of stuff so that you really understand the answer.
Yep.
So anyway, yeah, I just wonder if you talk about that.
I think that's one of the parts that's most exciting to me about generative art. I remember my dad is a painter and a good painter, and I grew up painting because I wanted to be like my dad, and I could do it, and it made me feel cool. And my dad does not like the art I like, though. He likes paintings of cowboys going across a river or something like that. And so I remember taking him to the museum and taking him to the modern art floor, and we were standing in front of a Rothko, and I said this to some of the students today, but it's like, if you think my work is about color, you don't understand it at all. And I just remember thinking that's such a shitty thing to say to somebody standing in front of a painting. And I hate the idea that the artist gets to offer one solution and say, this painting needs to be red. Like, it's got to be red, and there's one of it, and if you don't like red, then that's your problem. And I was so interested in the idea of generative art being like, let's open doors for everyone to come in. Like, if you like blue, I got a painting for you. If you like green, I got a painting for you. If you like yellow, and I think as an artist, it also helped, as somebody like who like is a fan of art, like I loved consuming generative projects because the artist's thinking is revealed. It's not like hidden, the tortured artist in the top in his studio or his or her studio making this work. It's like, no, all your thinking's right on the surface. You can see this simple version, this super complicated one, this one in between. And I love that as a way of studying art. And to me, it invites more people into the art circle of like, it gives you less to say no to and more to say yes to. And I think that, again, it's like my client basis of like how to appease people and welcome people in. Because I think like you can be, a dictator about, and like the Steve Jobs model that gets fetishized in Northern California in terms of like, no, you throw the thing down and tell this is the only solution. And I just think like I'm so anti that and like want more people in with whatever color they want, with whatever shape they want, and like all the choice. And I just find it a much more interesting way to make work and to like consume work. Like it's a way more interesting way to study, and it's why I buy books. If I like a painting, you know, you buy the Warhol book and you're like, this is infinitely, well, he's a multiples guy, but you know what I'm saying? Like any Carl Andre, I love his work, but like one sculpture does not tell the story that he was trying to get across. And so that to me was one of the most exciting pieces of generative art, was that like we're welcoming multiple solutions, because everyone sees something different when they look at it. So I wanted everyone to be able to see something that was for them, obviously within a narrow range of the generative set, but it allowed the doors to be much more open, which for me was incredibly exciting.
Yeah. Okay, I'll go to audience questions. If you just kind of want to say it, I can repeat on so it's on microphone, or we got one.
We do have the
Never
mic
mind,
to
we can
move
pass around
too.
a mic.
Yeah, but we are recording, so we need to use the mics.
Hello, hi, how's it going?
Good.
Great to hear your presentation. I like watched half of it on YouTube, so but I showed up late. Sorry. The thing that is a point of questioning for me is like, how do you find the balance between creating systems and your own creativity? It seems like the exploration of the system is a lot of the process, and to me, especially when you're doing design, it feels like art really is more process-based, system-based than your creativity really has. Where is it sometimes? And not you personally.
Yep.
It's more of a introspective question.
Yep.
But I am dealing with that myself personally, so I just am like looking for some help, I guess.
I have feelings about this.
Okay.
So I can't think of a time I ever started on a computer. Even like my first Art Blocks project, Squares, was a photograph of my kids' toys magnetiles, which are blocks of translucent light or like translucent color. And I was swinging a camera that took a picture every 3 seconds. And my son was swinging a light. And I started, oh, that's pretty. And then I started to draw some, like just put 3 rectangles on top of it, which was like super pixelated typography in my head. And so for me, I was then, okay, I start with a drawing, I start with a photograph, I start with an observation in my head. And then I build the system to that. I never have ever started with an algorithm that is been published. And so I really try to start with something non-digital. I mean, and I don't make a point, like I guess the camera's digital, but you know what I'm saying? Like I don't start in code and start with a system. I have an idea, I have a way of making, and then I start like designing a system around it. The other thing I do is I ask people for help. And part of that is a way of getting myself, I am a bottleneck for my own work. I deeply believe in employing teams and working with, having collaborators, coworkers. So I'll just give a part of a project to somebody just to see what they'll do with it. Like in terms of like, how would you render that noise? How would you do this? Let's see. And like, I've been working with this guy, Arsh, for 10 years now, maybe even longer. And he's in India. We met when he was just graduated college. He is brilliant. And so is Laksh, if he's watching. Laksh is awesome too. They're both great, but Arsh has been with me longer, and I think so it's like free yourself from having to create every solution, start without a system, and then just remember like you can always break it. Like I think especially in graphic design, people are like, well, this is the system, and it's like, what's going to happen? Like the system police are going to come and arrest you? You know, like I think it's like you've got to find ways to creatively break the system. And I would say almost every generative artist here would say like, I mean, half of the Vera ones I showed you are bugs. You know, where the code broke, the system broke, and it's like, that is cool, save that. Yeah. What was that? And it's like, to me, that's part of the process. And so I think let the system be fragile, let it break, let it let you down, let it fail, and then rebuild it from scratch. Build a system on the back end of this. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. I think treat it like, you got it, when I say fragile, I mean to let it break, but like be painterly with it almost, like, you know, gestural and move it around. And I think like find your creativity out of the system, let the system then create. And I guarantee you, like, you'll find something more interesting when the system produces it than the one you made to start the system. I've never liked the first drawing I did better, even if it looks exactly the same.
Yeah.
It's less exciting. There's less juice in it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
That really helps.
Oh, great question.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Jeff and SoSoft. I was wondering if you could share a bit more light on your ongoing project in conversation, the book. So I had two specific questions. One, are the instructions generative or parametric? And then once you follow the instructions and each of you have your own output or interpretation, do you ever change it after seeing each other's versions?
I don't know what the word parametric means, so you're going to have to help me out.
Well, are the instructions generative? Like, do you have a system that populates those cells with like different?
So Jeff wrote the 36 principles, or 6 principles and with 6 sub-principles each. And then we have a shared part where it's principle, sub-principle, color, shape. And then after that, it's each of our own code. So we pull the same shape, we pull the same color palette to start. Like I said, I'm pulling in more colors. Like Jeff is being very like, these are the 2 colors and this is what I'm doing. And I've been pulling in more. So it starts with the same set of instructions of like what we're doing. And then once we get into like illustrating the principle, it's 2 separate code bases.
Yeah, so it's not so much that we're sharing instructions. It's kind of like we're sharing some seed sort of decisions, you know. So if you think about the structure of like a intro design textbook you would take as a first year, you know, art or design student, like what are the topics that get covered? And so we spent some time, you know, researching that and distilling it down to just like, okay, here's a core set of, we just arrived at 36 different single word things. Like, how do you represent that visually? So the system, there's kind of a overarching system that says randomly pick a principle, the colors, and a dominant shape. And then that just goes to Marty, goes to me, and then we've built our own composition engines to kind of take that and make something that fits, you know, those parameters. And then my system puts one up and his system puts one up, and then we see them side by side. So yeah, the idea in the end is that we, you know, and Marty and I work very differently. You do like to curate, and he does like to come in with his own decision making in terms of like, I want my things to look like this, and I'm much more like, system does what the system does, and that's what you get, you know. And so that's also been an interesting contrast. But yeah,
I learned on this project. Yeah.
So I don't. Does that help? Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have time for probably 2 more questions, and we have, well, let's do 3. We'll do these 3 in triangle.
Okay, so this is a question about context. So I worked in the Bay Area as a designer, so I'm very familiar with sort of the vibe there, so I'm really happy that you're here. Just like hearing you talk, it just feels like home, because it's home to me. It's a very particular sort of vibe. And I'm sorry to introduce the politics into it, but you know, it was really interesting seeing the Twitter logo, and I looked at your portfolio as well, and you've done some work with like SoftBank. All of these are very like culturally charged sort of like organizations in the moment. And then there's sort of like art in San Francisco right now where you kind of see the CCA and then like the San Francisco Art Institute and that whole thing going on. And it's nice to have you sitting here sort of like a bridge in between the art and design. And I'm just curious, like being there and like being in this space where generative art and open source is kind of like maybe like a parallel world to that kind of tech world, what your sort of like feeling around it is. It's very open-ended, so.
Yeah. Boy, that could go on for a while. Let me think of Client work is really hard, as you probably know, being a designer in the Bay Area, or anyone who's had a client, is really hard. And that comes with its own set of really weird conversations you have to have with yourself. I mean, Twitter was not hard. That was a totally different thing. The internet was a much more optimistic proposition. I mean, when I drew that bird, we were coming out of like the Arab Spring. Like, I actually made booklets, like little Twitter booklets for Coachella of what a tweet was. What is it? What is Twitter? What is a tweet? And so it was just a different time. And then as far as like the clients, I quickly learned. I had a lot of back and forth internally about working for SoftBank. And then when I went and checked the cap tables of all the other companies that I worked for, that went away very quickly. Because I was like, if I start down this rabbit hole, I will never work for anyone ever again. And my client for SoftBank was one of the best people I've ever met. You know, he's a wonderful guy. And so I looked at it like, who am I working for? Who am I making work for? You know, and it was for my client. And, you know, those sort of problems, like I said, I think are on every cap table in the world, not just Silicon Valley, if you want to really get into that. In terms of the art and the design stuff, I've learned that I need both. I used to think when I'm an artist and I can not do graphic design, all of my problems will go away. And that was so foolish and so immature. But I think I'd held it up in my head for so long, and I kind of had come to the idea that I'll never be an artist. I'm not going to reach that. I'm not going to get to do that because I tried really hard. And then I got to do art, and when I did it full time, I didn't like it because I started having to rely on my art for money, and I don't like that. I like to let it be as weird as I want it to be, and I'm making some really weird stuff right now. That may not sell, and I want to be okay with that. And it also was too intense for me. I get, like, the art stuff is so intense that I feel like I need some time off from time to time, and I really enjoy, like, now that I'm on the other side, being in a conference room with like 9 people and they're like saying things like, I just don't think we have the right blue, you know? And I'm like, I would love to explore that. I will come back next week with 9 blues. And it's really easy to pick out 9 other blues, and it's to me, it's light, it's fun. I get to be around other people. Where art, you're alone. And unless you're collaborating, like, too many decisions on yourself. So I've learned to really feel that, like, I need the balance between the two, and they feed each other. A lot of the things that I found in corporate work ended up showing up in my art projects. And I think I've made a habit of trying to be very good about finding something in each project. Like whether I'm working with a new typeface that I love, or I've never worked with chartreuse. And I just make the project about that if it gets upsetting in any way. And so I've tried to like find that way to be positive. But it's a great question, and it's been rattling around in here for a long time too.
You kind of already answered my question, but I basically was kind of curious about, obviously you're kind of blending, challenging, inverting the line between art and design / commercial design, and how those are defined and communicated. So my original question was like, how do you approach your work differently when you're creating as an artist versus a designer? But I think on some level, what could be interesting to also ask is like, how do you see them as different and unique in terms of their relationship to culture and your goals when working within each medium / craft?
I think that design gives you scale, you know, so it's like your work is visible, which you don't get with art, in my opinion. Like, this many people go into a gallery ever in their whole life, and then this many people spend more than 5 minutes with your art. And so I think for me, it's been like an interesting thing of like, I love pop culture. I love sports. I love sports uniforms. Like, I desperately want to design a uniform. I desperately want to design a plane. Like, I would love to. I like designing the infrastructure of everyday life. Like, and I think that's what appealed to me about typography. And so, like, design gives me scale. I can drive past a billboard and look at that looks good, and like that's fun to see it up on a city skyline or something like that. Or my mom would go around the world and send me pictures of the Twitter bird on a museum glass door and be like, "You're in the museum here," you know, like she loved that, and like, oh, it's amazing, like, so that's really cool. But then I think like you're a translator. Your job is literally there to make the thing that they want. And early in my career, I used to try and be like, I'm the designer, but I've sort of, my job is to put the best version of what you want in front of you. And so when I do the art, that's where it's like, oh, now I get to make the thing I want. And that's the joy for me there, is getting able to, like, sounds so simple, but like art is an self-expression. And so for me, it's like bringing this enthusiasm I have about geometry or type or Enron or something, like, to an art project, and I get to spend time and make it and then realize it. Like, there's a thing at the end. And then, like Jeff was saying, sort of this community gave me a group of people, and I kind of can't believe it, who like it. You know, that never was part of my design career. Like, you know, you'd have a 5-minute thing like, hey, they bought the logo, like, great job. And then you're on to the next one. But like when you connect with art, like collectors, and hear what they see in your work or something, or the way it's like, that is life-changing to hear somebody appreciate your work. It's humbling to have somebody say that to you, or like, and it's, my work doesn't sell at like crazy numbers or any, like, it's not that. It's just like, wow, that's in your house every day, and you walk past it and it brings you joy, like, almost makes me want to cry. And, you know, like, that's so much cooler than scale, but the scale is interesting and it pays. And so I do that to make money, and then those fund my art projects, which break even basically on a good day. And, but I get that internal satisfaction of, I was joking when we were setting up the screen, like, the color was so nice, and I can't believe I made that, you know, like, whoa. And you get to look back and think about what that was, and it's so nice to have something that isn't for commerce, I think, too. I mean, I know it sells, but it's different than trying to sell a shoe or, you know, a fund or something like that. So they both really help me and serve a purpose, and I've learned over time that I need to be doing both.
And while we're passing, I just want to touch, so something you've talked about recently is that there's been a little bit of merging, it sounds like. So some of your design work clients are asking you to do systems thinking sorts of things, and
super exciting.
they're asked.
Yeah. Major, like, big, boring companies are asking for generative art, which is super exciting.
Quick question. So both of you guys have been confronted with, like, what is art and what isn't art, especially when it comes with code-based art. And I know both of you guys live on Twitter, and you guys have seen the conversation about AI art and what's out there. As AI has lowered the barrier for coding, and some of those people are skipping code training or learning to code, do you guys see that type of art different if someone is using AI to work on code-based art?
Do you want to go first?
Sure. No, not at all. So, I mean, my background is in fine art. I have an MFA in painting, and I reached a point in my career where I wanted to do sort of iterative systems-based work, and so I taught myself, I discovered what processing was around 2010 and taught myself how to use it, but I'm coming at it like literally with an art degree, you know what I mean? So I don't have my skill set as a coder is, you know, not great, self-taught and very rudimentary, I guess is what I would say. And AI for me has actually over the last, I mean, particularly the last just several months, it's just like, has really opened up, like, you know, what I can do, you know, the ceiling's kind of lifted off. So, no, because I don't think being necessarily a practitioner of a certain skill makes you an artist. It helps. It's really great to have, like, the best control over your tools that you possibly can, but that doesn't bring the art to the thing that you're doing. And so I'm all for it. Yeah, so whatever tool sets you have at your disposal, if they allow you to express your creativity in its fullest way, you know, that the creativity is where the art is. The art doesn't just come automatically out of AI without a human putting it towards something. I mean, I guess it does, but that's less interesting to me, you know, that, so, yeah, no, I'm definitely not a human written code purist or something, like, when it comes to generative art. Like, use the tools, yeah, and make the best thing that you can make, so. And I think you're starting to get pilled into AI stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Too. So.
Yeah, no, I think it's like just the most exciting time ever to be making art. I think the world is starting to open up. I think digital is coming and people are feeling more and more comfortable with it. Like every 3 months, I feel like you can just feel the tidal wave. And I saw something with like Diplo today where he was just like, if you're not using it, you're losing. Like you're gonna lose to technology. And I think it's like Jeff said, you can use anything poorly and it can make terrible art, and you can harness it and make something that people have never seen before. And so I think it's just like an incredible time to be an artist and to be making art.
Thank you guys.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you guys.